It was a stormy night. Rain poured relentlessly, and thunder echoed through the empty streets. A small dog, drenched and shivering, limped across the road, narrowly avoiding cars that sped past without a second glance. His fur was matted, one ear torn, and his eyes carried the weight of countless unspoken stories. No one knew where he had come from, but everyone who passed him by could see he was broken. Yet somehow, he still moved forward, as if searching for something. Or someone. From the window of a dimly lit apartment above a bakery, a young woman named Emily stared out into the storm. She had moved to this city a few months ago, trying to escape her past. Emily had dreams once, dreams of becoming an artist, but after her parents' sudden death in an accident, everything had fallen apart. Now she spent her days working long hours at a local cafe, and her nights alone with her sketchbook, drawing faceless figures that mirrored her own loneliness. Sigh. She sipped her lukewarm tea. Her gaze caught sight of the dog below. Something about him struck her deeply. Perhaps it was the way he stood, defeated, yet unyielding. Without thinking, she grabbed her coat and ran outside, the cold rain soaking her within seconds. "Hey! Hey, little guy!" she called softly, approaching, cautiously. The dog looked up, his body tensing, ready to run. But Emily knelt down, holding out a piece of leftover bread she had snatched from her counter. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. Come here." The dog hesitated, his eyes filled with fear and distrust, but also a faint glimmer of hope. Slowly, shakily, he stepped closer, until finally, he snatched the bread and gulped it down. Emily smiled, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "You're safe now." That night was the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. Emily named him Rusty, because of the reddish patches of fur beneath all the dirt and grime. The first few days were tough. Rusty refused to eat much, growled when she tried to touch him, and cowered at every sudden noise. But Emily was patient. She knew what it felt like to be scared and alone. Every night she would sit on the floor, reading softly to him, telling him stories about her life, her dreams, and her fears. Bit by bit, Rusty began to trust her. Meanwhile, life outside her small apartment kept moving. Her boss, Mr. Jenkins, a grumpy old man with a soft spot for coffee, started noticing her coming in late, distracted. "You all right, Emily? You look like you've been wrestling a bear every morning." Emily smiled weakly. "Something like that." She didn't tell anyone about Rusty, not yet. He was her secret companion, the only one who seemed to understand her. Pain without asking for explanations. Weeks turned into months, and Rusty transformed. His fur grew shiny, his eyes brighter. He followed Emily everywhere, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something close to happiness. But their peace was about to be shattered. One evening, while Emily and Rusty were walking through the park, a man in a dark coat approached them. Rusty immediately tensed, growling low in his throat. Emily tightened her grip on his leash. "That your dog?" the man asked, his voice rough. Emily hesitated. "Yes." "Why?" the man sneered. "Looks a lot like a dog I used to own." "You sure you didn't steal him?" Emily's heart pounded. "I found him on the street. He was in bad shape." "Yeah, well, he was mine, and I want him back." Before Emily could respond, Rusty lunged, snarling, placing himself between her and the man. The man stumbled back, startled. "You better watch yourself. I'll be back for him." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Who was that man? And what had Rusty been through before she found him? Her mind raced with fear and anger. She couldn't let anyone take Rusty away, not after everything they had been through together. As days passed, Emily became more determined. She visited a vet to get Rusty checked and documented as hers. The vet, Dr. Patel, a kind woman with a warm smile, listened carefully as Emily explained everything. "You did a good thing, Emily," Dr. Patel said, stroking Rusty's head. "But if someone claims him, you'll need proof you've been taking care of him. I'll help however I can." Meanwhile, strange things began happening. Emily would find her door slightly ajar when she was sure she had locked it. Rusty would growl at shadows in the hallway. One night, she found a threatening note slipped under her door. "He's mine. You'll regret keeping him." Fear gnawed at her. But every time she looked at Rusty's loyal eyes, she knew she couldn't give up. She started gathering evidence. Photos of Rusty's condition when she found him, vet bills, adoption forms, and she reached out to a local animal rights group, hoping they could help. But the real turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, as Emily was sketching in the park, a little girl approached, fascinated by Rusty. "Can I pet him?" she asked shyly. Rusty, surprisingly gentle, wagged his tail and licked her hand. The girl giggled, and soon her mother joined them. As they talked, Emily learned that this woman, Mrs. Thompson, was a lawyer, one who specialized in animal welfare cases. When Emily explained her situation, Mrs. Thompson immediately offered to help. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. "We'll make sure no one takes him away." Over time, as the case built up, Emily began to find her voice again. She started painting real faces, filled with emotion and strength. Rusty would sit by her side, watching her work, as if he knew he had been the muse that brought color back into her life. The man did return, but this time, Emily was ready. With Mrs. Thompson by her side and Rusty sitting proudly next to her, she faced him without fear. The man smirked, but Mrs. Thompson was quick to speak. "If you come near them again, we will press charges for harassment. And by the way, Rusty has been registered under Emily's name now. You have no legal claim." The man's face twisted with anger. "You don't know who you're messing with, Mrs. Thompson smiled calmly. "Oh, I think we do. Now leave." Defeated, the man stalked away, and Emily felt a weight lift off her chest. Rusty nudged her hand, and she knelt to hug him tightly. But Emily knew this wasn't truly the end. There were still wounds inside Rusty that hadn't fully healed, and as for herself, she had started feeling alive again. But there was more healing to do. That night, as they sat together by the window, watching the city lights, Emily whispered, "We're safe now, Rusty, and I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Days turned into weeks, and although Emily and Rusty had won the first battle, a storm still loomed over their lives. Emily's fear of the man returning never completely left her mind. She would double-check the locks at night, and Rusty, ever vigilant, would stay near the door, listening to every creak and footstep outside. Meanwhile, Emily's art began to reflect her journey with Rusty. Her paintings, once filled with faceless figures, now featured vibrant images of hope, strength, and loyalty. One day, as she hung her latest painting in the cafe where she worked, a beautiful portrait of Rusty sitting proudly against a bright sky, a woman approached her. "You painted this?" the woman asked, her eyes shining. Emily nodded shyly. "Yes, that's my dog, Rusty," the woman smiled. "I run a local art gallery. We're holding an exhibition for new artists next month. I think people need to see this. See you." For the first time in months, Emily felt a spark of excitement. Could this be her chance to finally pursue her dream? As Emily prepared for the exhibition, Rusty's past continued to haunt them. One evening, as they walked their usual route to the park, a black car slowly crept behind them. Rusty growled low, his body stiffening. Emily turned, her heart racing, but the car sped off before she could see who was inside. She tried to shake off the fear, focusing on the good things, the exhibition, Rusty's progress. But deep down, she knew danger was still lurking. The day of the exhibition arrived. Emily was a bundle of nerves as she set up her paintings. To her surprise, people gathered around Rusty's portrait, asking about his story. When she shared how she found him, people were moved. Some even shared their own stories of rescued animals. For the first time, Emily felt seen, heard, and understood. Among the visitors was Mrs. Thompson, the lawyer who had helped her. She smiled as she approached Emily. "You've come a long way. Rusty's lucky to have you." Emily smiled back, her eyes glistening. "I think I'm the lucky one." But just as things seemed to be falling into place, trouble returned. Late that night, as Emily and Rusty walked home, they found their apartment door slightly open. Emily's stomach dropped. She was sure she had locked it. Inside, the place was ransacked, drawers pulled out, papers scattered, and Rusty's bed torn apart. Rusty barked furiously, sniffing every corner, his hackles raised. Emily picked up a piece of paper left on her table. It read, "You've been warned." Tears filled her eyes as she hugged Rusty tightly. "I won't let them take you. I promise." Determined not to live in fear, Emily contacted Mrs. Thompson the next morning. The lawyer was quick to act, filing a police report and helping Emily file for a restraining order against the man who had claimed Rusty. The police assured Emily they would patrol the area more frequently. Still, Emily knew she needed to protect Rusty and herself. She began taking self-defense classes and even installed a security system in her apartment. Rusty, too, was enrolled in special training classes to help him feel more secure and to ensure he could protect Emily if needed. Despite the fear, life started to bloom again. Emily's art gained attention. She was invited to speak at a local event about the healing power of rescuing animals. As she stood on stage, Rusty by her side, she looked at the crowd and said, "I thought I saved Rusty when I found him, but really, he saved me. We gave each other a second chance." The audience applauded. Some moved to tears. Among them was a young girl sitting with her mother who came up afterward. "I'm scared sometimes too," the girl admitted, petting Rusty gently. "But if he can be brave, maybe I can too." Emily smiled, kneeling beside the girl. "You're braver than you think, and Rusty will always remind us that even when life gets tough, we can keep going." But Emily knew the man from Rusty's past hadn't given up. She could feel it in the way shadows seemed to move outside her window at night, and in Rusty's tense body when they walked past certain streets. Yet, she also knew she was stronger now. She had a community, friends, and Rusty, her loyal companion, by her side. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she wasn't facing them alone. Weeks passed, and though Emily tried to focus on her art and Rusty, a part of her mind always remained alert. But something had changed, not just in her, but in Rusty too. His confidence had grown. The timid broken dog she had first rescued was now her protector, always watchful, but no longer afraid. One bright morning, Emily received an unexpected call from Mrs. Thompson. "Emily, I have some news. The man claiming Rusty has a criminal record. Animal abuse, illegal dogfighting. The police are opening an investigation." Emily felt both relief and anger. "So Rusty was..." Mrs. Thompson's voice softened. "He was likely abused, forced to fight. But you saved him, Emily, and now we have a case to keep him safe." Despite the good news, Emily knew they had to be cautious. She decided to temporarily stay with a friend, Lisa, who lived in a quieter neighborhood. Lisa, a fellow animal lover, welcomed them with open arms. Rusty, though nervous at first, soon warmed up to Lisa's gentle nature and her old Labrador, Buddy. The peaceful environment seemed to help Rusty. Emily could see him relax more, sleeping soundly for the first time in weeks, and Emily herself felt supported, no longer feeling like she had to face the danger alone. Meanwhile, her art career continued to rise. Her story, and Rusty's, had spread throughout the community, and Emily was asked to do a series of paintings to raise awareness for animal abuse and rescue. The project gave her a sense of purpose, and Rusty was by her side for every brushstroke. During an art event for the series, a journalist approached her. "Emily, people are inspired by what you've done. Would you be open to sharing Rusty's story in a feature?" Emily hesitated, but then looked at Rusty. His eyes, once filled with fear, now glowed with quiet strength. "Yes, I think it's time people..." I know the article was published under the title, "From the Streets to a Loving Home, Rusty's Journey." It detailed not only Rusty's recovery, but also Emily's. Messages of support poured in. People offered help, shared their own rescue stories, and donations were raised for local shelters. But not all responses were kind. Hidden among the supportive messages, there were anonymous threats. "You think you've won? He belongs to us." Emily shared these with Mrs. Thompson and the police. They took them seriously, increasing patrols and advising Emily to stay vigilant. One chilly evening, as Emily sat with Lisa and Rusty by the fireplace, there was a knock at the door. Rusty stood up, ears perked, growling low. Lisa went to check, peeking through the window. Her face turned pale. "Emily, it's him. He's outside." Emily's heart raced. Lisa quickly locked the door and Emily grabbed her phone, calling the police. Rusty stood in front of her, protective, as the man began banging on the door, shouting, "Give me my dog!" Minutes felt like hours until the police finally arrived. They pulled the man away, warning him to stay away or face jail time. Emily trembled as she hugged Rusty tightly. "You're safe. I won't let anyone take you." The next day, Mrs. Thompson called. "Emily, we'll be pushing for a permanent restraining order and working with animal control to press charges against him. And there's more good news. An animal rescue organization wants to honor Rusty and you at their annual gala." Emily smiled through tears. "We've come so far." The gala night was magical. People gathered to celebrate rescued animals and their new beginnings. Emily, dressed beautifully, walked on stage with Rusty, who had been groomed and wore a little bow tie. As she shared her story, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "Rusty taught me that no matter how broken we feel, love and patience can heal. He's not just a survivor, he's my hero." The crowd erupted in applause as Rusty wagged his tail proudly. But Emily knew their journey wasn't over. Healing took time, and although Rusty had come far, there were still moments when he would wake from nightmares, shaking, and Emily would hold him close, whispering, "You're safe now. I'm here." In many ways, they were healing each other. Two souls who had found their way out of darkness together. And as Emily looked at Rusty sleeping peacefully by her side, she knew one thing for sure. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm for Emily and Rusty. Emily continued working on her art projects and volunteering at the local shelter, where she shared Rusty's story to inspire others. Rusty had become somewhat of a local celebrity. Everyone knew the brave dog who had survived so much. But deep inside, Emily knew they were not completely safe. Even with the restraining order in place, the shadow of Rusty's abuser lingered in her mind. She started taking self-defense classes, determined to protect both herself and Rusty if needed. One day, while Emily was at the cafe sketching a new painting, a woman approached her. She was in her early 30s with kind eyes and a soft voice. "Excuse me, are you Emily? The one with Rusty?" Emily looked up, curious but cautious. "Yes, that's me." The woman smiled gently. "My name is Sarah. I think I know Rusty. Or at least I knew him before he was taken." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You knew him?" Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I used to volunteer at a shelter a few towns over. We called him Shadow because he used to follow me everywhere. One day he was stolen. We've been searching for him ever since." Emily was stunned. Could this be true? Rusty's past was even more complicated than she thought. "Do you have proof?" she asked carefully. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through old photos, and there he was. A younger Rusty, or Shadow, sitting next to Sarah, looking healthier, but still with that same gentle expression. "I couldn't believe it when I read your story," Sarah whispered. "It's him." Emily felt a wave of emotions, shock, sadness, but also relief. "Do you want to see him?" she asked finally. "More than anything," Sarah replied. Later that day, they met at Lisa's house. Rusty was lying on the couch when Sarah walked in. At first he tensed up, unsure. But then, as Sarah knelt down and softly called, "Shadow?" something in Rusty changed. His ears perked up, and cautiously, he approached her, sniffing her hands. Then, as if recognizing her, he let out a small whine and nuzzled her. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "It's really you." Emily watched, her own eyes misty. "He's been through so much." Sarah nodded, gently stroking Rusty's fur. "I never stopped thinking about him." Over the next few days, Emily and Sarah spent time together, sharing everything they knew about Rusty's life. Sarah told Emily about how Rusty had been rescued from a puppy mill when he was just a few months old, and how he had been such a loving companion before being stolen. Knowing more about Rusty's past filled in many blanks for Emily. The fear of loud noises, the hesitation around strangers. She finally understood why Rusty was the way he was. Sarah never once asked to take Rusty back, though Emily could see how much she loved him. One afternoon as they sat in the park, Sarah said quietly, "I can see how much he loves you. You've done for him what I couldn't. You gave him a second chance." Emily reached over and squeezed her hand. "You were his first safe place. Maybe now, together, we can give him the life he always deserved." Sarah smiled through tears. "I'd like that." As the months passed, Sarah became part of their small family. Rusty grew more confident, knowing he was surrounded by people who loved him. Emily's art thrived too. She held an exhibition called Second Chances, featuring paintings inspired by Rusty's journey and other rescued animals. The event raised enough funds to help build a new wing for the shelter, one that would be named Rusty's Haven. But perhaps the most beautiful change was in Emily herself. The woman who had once been broken by grief now stood tall, a survivor, an advocate, and above all, a friend to a dog who had never given up. And as Emily, Sarah, and Rusty sat together under the setting sun, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink, Emily whispered, "We saved each other." Rusty, now peaceful and strong, laid his head on her lap, closing his eyes as if to say, "Yes, we did." Life was beginning to feel whole again. Emily, Sarah, and Rusty formed a small but unbreakable family. Rusty's story had become a beacon of hope for others, and Emily found herself speaking at events, sharing their journey to inspire more rescues and adoptions. However, life had one more twist in store for them. One afternoon, while Emily and Sarah were walking Rusty in the park, Emily noticed a man sitting on a bench watching them intently. Rusty, usually calm, tensed and growled lowly, standing in front of Emily protectively. Sarah put a hand on Emily's arm. "That man, I think I've seen him before." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You think it's him? The one who hurt Rusty?" Sarah nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the stranger. "I'm almost sure." Not wanting to panic, Emily quickly took out her phone and snapped a picture of the man. They calmly walked away, but Rusty kept glancing back, his body alert. Once home, Emily sent the photo to Mrs. Thompson, their lawyer, and to the police, explaining everything. "We'll look into it immediately," the officer assured them. Days later, they got a call. The man had been identified, and he was under investigation for involvement in an illegal dogfighting ring still operating nearby. The authorities asked Emily for her help. "You and Rusty could help us bring this operation down." Emily hesitated. The idea of putting Rusty through more danger terrified her. But Sarah gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You always said you wanted to help stop this for good. Maybe this is how." Emily looked at Rusty, now lying calmly beside her, but with those eyes that had seen so much darkness. "If we can help stop them and save other dogs, we'll do it." The next few weeks were intense. Emily worked with the authorities, providing them with Rusty's medical records, behavior observations, and even letting them photograph Rusty for evidence of his past injuries. They also set up surveillance in the park, hoping to catch the man, meeting with others involved. Meanwhile, Emily and Sarah kept Rusty's life as normal as possible. They took him on nature walks, played with him at home, and made sure he knew he was safe and loved. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, Emily got a call from Officer Daniels. "We've got them. Thanks to your help, we were able to catch them red-handed organizing a fight. Rusty's case will be crucial in making sure they never harm another animal again." Emily's knees gave out as she sat down, tears in her eyes. "It's over?" "It's over," Daniels confirmed. "You've done something incredible." A month later, Emily was invited to speak at a major animal welfare conference. Sarah and Rusty accompanied her, sitting in the front row. As Emily took the stage, she looked at the crowd and then down at Rusty, who wagged his tail softly. "Rusty and I share a story of survival. But this isn't just our story. It's the story of every abused, abandoned animal waiting for a second chance. Rusty taught me about resilience, forgiveness, and hope. Together we fought back, and now because of him, other dogs won't have to suffer what he went through." The audience erupted in applause. Many moved to tears. As Emily stepped down, Rusty walked proudly beside her, his head high. Life moved forward. Rusty was no longer just a rescued dog. He was a symbol of strength and hope. Emily and Sarah decided to start their own small rescue organization, focusing on dogs from abusive backgrounds. They named it Rusty's Legacy. Rusty spent his days surrounded by love, visiting shelters with Emily to comfort other scared animals, and enjoying long, peaceful naps under the sun, something he had once only dreamed of. And every night, as Emily and Sarah sat on the porch, Rusty by their side, Emily would whisper, "You changed my life, Rusty. And now, we're changing the, world." Rusty would wag his tail gently, resting his head on her knee as if saying, "Together, always." Months after the takedown of the dog fighting ring, Emily and Sarah found themselves busier than ever. Rusty's Legacy had become a growing organization, attracting volunteers and donations from all over the country. Rusty, once a victim, was now a face of hope featured in magazines, posters, and online campaigns. Despite the growing fame, Rusty remained the same loving and loyal dog at home, always seeking Emily's side when the day was done. His gentle presence was a reminder of why they started this journey. One crisp autumn morning, as Emily and Sarah prepared for an adoption event at a local park, Rusty trotted happily alongside them. The park was filled with colorful tents, banners, and happy dogs waiting to meet new families. The event had become a yearly tradition, where rescue stories were shared and bonds were formed. As Emily was arranging the booth, a small girl with blonde curls approached Rusty. She was hesitant at first, but extended a tiny hand toward him. Rusty, with his usual gentleness, sniffed her hand and gave a soft wag of his tail. The girl beamed, kneeling to hug him. Her mother, standing close, wiped a tear. "She's been afraid of dogs since our family dog passed away. But Rusty, he's different." Emily knelt beside them. "Rusty knows what it's like to be scared. But love helps us heal." The day was filled with stories like this: dogs finding new homes, children laughing, and people connecting over their shared love for animals. Emily shared Rusty's story on stage once more, speaking of his journey from abuse to heroism. The applause was thunderous, and Rusty stood proudly, basking in the affection of the crowd. As the sun set, Emily and Sarah sat on a bench, Rusty curled between them. "Look how far we've come," Sarah whispered. Emily nodded, eyes misty. "And there's still so much to do." Weeks later, as winter crept in, Emily received an unexpected letter. It was from a young man named Jacob, who had read about Rusty in an Met article. His words were shaky, but heartfelt. "Dear Emily, I don't know how to say this, but your story saved me. I was part of a dog fighting group. I hated myself for what I was doing. But reading about Rusty, about how he survived and about how you never gave up on him, made me realize I had to change. I'm now working with a shelter, trying to make up for what I did. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know That Rusty's story is changing more lives than you can imagine. Thank you. Emily read the letter twice, her hands trembling. Sarah, you need to read this. Tears streamed down both their faces as they realized Rusty's reach went beyond what they ever hoped. Inspired, Emily decided to start a new program within Rusty's Legacy, one that reached out to those involved in abuse, helping them reform and contribute positively to animal welfare. It was a difficult and controversial decision, but Emily believed in second chances, just as Rusty had been given one. The program, named From Darkness to Light, started with small meetings. Former abusers, under guidance, learned to care for rescued dogs, witnessing firsthand the healing they had once denied them. Rusty would visit these meetings, and even the hardest hearts seemed to soften in his presence. One young man, Chris, who had been sentenced to community service for his role in illegal fighting, broke down in tears one day while brushing a timid puppy. I never knew dogs could trust like this again. I don't deserve this chance. Emily knelt beside him. Neither did Rusty deserve what happened to him, but he forgave. And now, so can you, if you choose to be better. Months turned into a year, and Rusty's legacy grew stronger. Emily and Sarah were invited to national conferences, consulted by lawmakers working on stricter animal protection laws. They pushed for harsher penalties for abuse and better rehabilitation options. One day, while walking through the same park where Emily had first seen Rusty, she noticed a new statue near the fountain, a life-sized bronze sculpture of a dog, with a plaque that read, "In honor of Rusty, the dog who taught us about forgiveness, courage, and love. May we always choose kindness." Emily stood silently, tears in her eyes as Rusty sat beside her, looking up at his likeness. "You did this, boy. You changed the world." Sarah joined them, wrapping an arm around Emily. "And you gave him the chance." As time passed, Rusty grew, older. His muzzle turned gray and his steps became slower, but his spirit remained strong. He continued visiting shelters, comforting new rescues, and lying at Emily's feet as she worked late into the night on new projects. One spring morning, Emily woke to find Rusty sitting quietly on the porch, gazing at the sunrise. She joined him, wrapping a blanket around them both. "Still watching over us, huh?" she whispered, petting his soft fur. Rusty leaned into her touch, sighing contentedly. Emily knew their time together was precious and vowed to make every moment count. In honor of Rusty, Emily and Sarah launched a new campaign, Rusty's Pledge, a vow people could take to stand against animal cruelty and support rescues. Thousands signed, and schools began teaching children about kindness to animals, sharing Rusty's story as a lesson of hope and compassion. As Emily looked out over a gathering of supporters wearing shirts that read, "Be like Rusty," she knew their Maisaites journey had created a ripple that would continue for generations. Rusty, resting at her feet, gave a soft wag of his tail, as if to say, "We did it." Spring had arrived in full bloom, and Rusty, though older and grayer, still carried a spark in his eyes that melted hearts wherever he went. Emily and Sarah had built not only a rescue organization but a movement, one that inspired communities far beyond their town. One bright morning, as the birds sang outside, Emily was going through letters at the kitchen table when she found a formal invitation. Her eyes widened as she read it. "Sarah, come look at this," she called out, her hands trembling slightly. Sarah, wiping her hands on a towel, came over and read the letter. It was from an international animal welfare organization inviting Emily and Rusty to speak at a global summit in Europe. They want Rusty to be the symbol of resilience and compassion worldwide. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "I never imagined Rusty going global." A month later, they boarded a plane. Rusty nestled comfortably in his travel crate, looking around curiously. When they arrived, they were greeted with cheers and reporters holding up cameras. Rusty was an international celebrity now, but Emily kept reminding herself that behind all the fame was a dog who had once been broken and afraid. At the summit, as Emily took the stage with Rusty sitting calmly beside her, The room fell silent. Images of Rusty's journey flashed across the giant screens, his rescue, his recovery, and all the dogs he had helped since. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emily began, her voice steady, "Rusty's story is not just about survival. It's about the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And today I ask all of you to carry that message home. Every animal deserves a second chance, just like Rusty." The applause was thunderous. Rusty, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, let out a small bark, making the crowd laugh and cheer even louder. Returning home, Emily and Sarah were greeted by local news and neighbors, proud of Rusty's global recognition. But fame didn't change them. Their mission remained: save lives, one dog at a time. One evening, as Emily reviewed a new set of rescue cases, she paused on a photo of a dog that made her heart ache. It was a German Shepherd, emaciated and scarred, with eyes that mirrored the same fear Rusty once had. "We have to bring him here," Emily whispered to Sarah. "Rusty can help him heal." A week later, the new rescue, whom they named Shadow, arrived. He was skittish, refusing to eat or come near anyone. Rusty, ever the gentle soul, approached him slowly, lying down a few feet away as if to say, "I've been there too." Days turned into weeks, and Shadow began to trust Rusty. He would watch as Rusty wagged his tail and accepted treats. Finally, one morning, Shadow walked over and gently sniffed Rusty's ear. Emily watched from afar, tears streaming down her face. He's learning. To trust Shadow's progress was slow but steady. By summer, he would follow Rusty around the garden, though he still kept a wary distance from others. Emily and Sarah knew it would take time. Rusty had taught them that healing couldn't be rushed. One afternoon, while Emily was tending to the flowers, a small group of children from the local school arrived for a visit. It had become part of Rusty's legacy to teach kids about kindness toward animals. The children giggled and squealed when Rusty trotted over to greet them, tail wagging like a banner of hope. Shadow watched from behind a tree, unsure. Emily noticed and smiled gently. "It's okay, Shadow. No one here will hurt you." Rusty, as if understanding, walked to Shadow and sat beside him, giving him a soft nudge. Slowly, Shadow stepped forward, eyes on the children. One of the braver kids, a boy named Liam, knelt down, holding out a hand. After a tense moment, Shadow crept closer, sniffed Liam's fingers, and gave a small lick. The children cheered quietly, and Emily's heart swelled. It was a breakthrough. As autumn approached, a new challenge arrived. Emily got a call from a nearby city where an illegal breeder had been shut down, leaving behind over 50 abused and neglected dogs. The local shelters were overwhelmed. "We have to help," Emily told Sarah, determination in her eyes. They worked tirelessly to prepare for the new arrivals. Volunteers came in droves, setting up temporary kennels, gathering food, and donating supplies. Rusty, though aging, still moved among them, offering calm reassurance to the frightened newcomers. Among the new rescues was a small blind puppy named Daisy. She was frail and scared, shivering in her tiny crate. Emily picked her up gently, whispering soothing words. "You're safe now. We've got you." Rusty was immediately drawn to Daisy. He would sit next to her crate, keeping her company. One evening, Daisy stumbled out of her bed trying to follow Rusty's scent. He patiently let her bump into him, guiding her back with soft nudges. Emily watched this bond form and knew Rusty had found a new purpose, mentoring not just Shadow, but now Daisy too. Meanwhile, Rusty's legacy launched a massive campaign to raise funds for the growing number of rescues. Emily began giving interviews, telling the stories of Rusty, Shadow, and Daisy. Donations poured in from all over the world. People sent letters, thanking them for the work they were doing and sharing how Rusty's story had inspired them to adopt and save animals. As winter set in, Emily knew they needed more space. The small rescue center couldn't hold all the dogs now under their kiddo. With the funds raised, they purchased a larger piece of land and began building Rusty's Haven, a sanctuary for abused and abandoned animals. On the day of the groundbreaking ceremony, people gathered from neighboring towns, holding signs that read, "Hope lives here," and "In Rusty we trust." Rusty stood proudly at Emily's side as she gave her speech. "This haven is for every animal that's been broken, every soul that needs healing. Because of Rusty and all of you, we can give them the life they deserve." Months passed, and Rusty's haven took shape. Spacious fields for dogs to run freely, warm kennels, and a training center for new volunteers. Shadow, now braver, often led groups of new rescues on walks, while Daisy had become a symbol of resilience, her gentle nature endearing her to everyone who visited. Then came news that shook Emily deeply. Rusty had been nominated for a National Animal Hero Award. Though humbled, Emily knew Rusty's story deserved to be heard by as many people as possible. They traveled to the ceremony in the capital, where Rusty was met with thunderous applause. As Emily held his leash, she shared his journey one more time. The hall silent except for her voice and the occasional soft murmur of emotion. Rusty showed me that love and patience can heal even the deepest wounds. And now, he's helping countless others do the same. If there's one lesson we should all take from Rusty, it's that no one is too broken to be saved. When Rusty was presented with his medal, he gave a gentle bark that echoed through the hall, a symbol of triumph over adversity. Back home, life continued, and Rusty's age began to show. He slept more, his walk slower, but his heart was as big as ever. Shadow never left his side, always watching over him. Daisy would curl up against Rusty at night, as if drawing strength from his presence. One warm spring evening, as the sun set in a sky painted with hues of orange and pink, Emily sat on the porch, Rusty's head in her lap. "You've done more than anyone could ever ask, boy," she whispered, stroking his soft fur. Rusty looked up at her, eyes full of love, before resting his head back down with a content sigh. Sarah joined her, placing a gentle hand on Rusty's back. "He knows, Emily. He knows he's home." As night fell, the porch light glowing warmly, Emily gazed out at Rusty's haven, dogs playing, volunteers laughing, and the legacy of one brave dog living on. She knew that no matter what, Rusty's spirit would remain in every rescued life, in every healed heart. And somewhere in the quiet night, a gentle breeze stirred, as if carrying Rusty's message to the world. Never give up. Love heals all. As spring melted into summer, the rescue center was thriving. Rusty's haven had grown beyond what Emily and Sarah had ever imagined. But with growth came new challenges, more dogs arriving, each with their own painful history, needing more care and love. Shadow had now fully transformed. Once a fearful and broken German shepherd, he had become Rusty's right paw, helping calm the newcomers. Daisy, though blind, had developed incredible intuition and would guide other anxious dogs, showing them it was safe to trust again. One warm evening, while Emily walked through the fields with Rusty and Shadow, a soft breeze danced through the grass. Rusty's steps were slower now, but his gaze remained sharp, watching over the pack that had become his family. As Emily knelt to adjust Rusty's harness, Sarah came running toward them, a letter in her hand. "Emily, you'll want to see this." Emily stood, taking the letter. As she read, her eyes filled with surprise. "It's from a filmmaker," she said, glancing at Sarah. "They want to make a documentary about Rusty's life and our rescue. They think it could inspire people worldwide to start their own havens." Sarah's face lit up. Imagine how many dogs that could save. Weeks later, a film crew arrived. Cameras followed Emily, Rusty, Shadow, Daisy, and the other dogs as they went about their days, rescuing, healing, and loving. The crew captured every moment, Rusty comforting a frightened puppy, Shadow gently nudging a new arrival toward Emily, Daisy leading a blindfolded volunteer through a trust exercise. During interviews, Emily shared Rusty's journey, the lessons he had taught her, and the hope they had found together. Rusty showed me that even in darkness, love can bring light. The documentary titled Rusty's Haven, A Story of Healing was released to critical acclaim. It aired in multiple countries, and soon letters flooded in, people inspired to adopt, to foster, to open their own rescues. The ripple Rusty had started was now a wave of compassion. But as Rusty's fame grew, so did the number of animals in need. Emily and Sarah worked tirelessly, though sometimes exhaustion crept in. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows, Sarah found Emily sitting by Rusty's bed, quietly crying. "What if we can't keep up?" Emily whispered, stroking Rusty's gray muzzle. "What if we can't save them all?" Sarah knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We may not save them all, but for each one we do, their world changes forever." That's what Rusty taught us. Rusty, as if understanding, lifted his head and gently licked Emily's hand. As months passed, Emily and Sarah's reputation drew attention from government agencies. They were asked to help design a national program for rescuing and rehabilitating abused animals. Emily was hesitant at first, but after much thought, she agreed, knowing Rusty's message could reach even further. Together, they worked on drafting laws to prevent cruelty, provide better shelter funding, and educate the public. Rusty became the mascot of the campaign, his face appearing on posters and billboards with the slogan, "Every life matters, every heart can heal." One day, as autumn leaves began to fall, a school bus arrived, bringing children for a special event, a day at Rusty's Haven. Emily loved these days, teaching the next generation about kindness and empathy. Rusty, though slower, still greeted each child, his eyes warm and inviting. A young girl named Lily, who had been afraid of dogs after a bad experience, stood back, clutching her teacher's hand. Emily knelt beside her. "Do you want to meet Rusty? He's very gentle." With some coaxing, Lily reached out a trembling hand. Rusty, patient as ever, softly nuzzled her fingers. The girl's eyes widened in surprise and wonder. By the end of the day, Lily was laughing as she played with Daisy and Shadow. "See," Emily whispered to Rusty later, "you're still changing lives." As winter set in, Rusty's health began to decline. The vet visits became more frequent, and Emily knew time was precious. Every moment spent with him was cherished. Walks through the garden, quiet nights by the fire, and mornings when Rusty would still try to wag his tail at the sound of Emily's voice. One snowy evening, Emily sat by the window, Rusty's head resting in her lap. Outside, Shadow and Daisy played in the snow, chasing each other around the yard. "You've built something beautiful, Rusty," Emily whispered. "Because of you, so many found hope." Rusty looked up, eyes filled with understanding and love, before resting peacefully again. Then, one quiet morning, Rusty passed away in his sleep, surrounded by those who loved him. The news of his passing spread quickly, and thousands of messages poured in from people whose lives Rusty had touched. Emily and Sarah held a memorial in the sanctuary garden. People from all over gathered to honor Rusty. They shared stories of how Rusty's journey had inspired them to adopt, to open shelters, to change laws. At the memorial, Emily stood before the crowd, Shadow and Daisy at her sides. "Rusty came into my life when we both needed healing. He taught me that no matter how broken you feel, love can mend even the deepest wounds. And now, as we say goodbye, I know his spirit will live on in every dog we rescue, in every person who chooses kindness." A stone was placed in the garden, engraved with Rusty's name and the words, "Forever in our hearts, the dog who taught the world to love again." In the months that followed, Rusty's Haven continued to grow. Inspired by Rusty's legacy, new branches opened in other towns. Emily and Sarah traveled to support these new havens, sharing Rusty's story and helping more animals find their forever homes. Shadow stepped up as the new leader among the dogs, guiding the fearful ones and showing them the safety of their new world. Daisy, ever intuitive, stayed by Emily's side, her quiet presence a reminder of the gentle strength Rusty had shared. One night, as Emily walked the fields under the stars, Shadow and Daisy close beside her, she paused and looked up. "Thank you, Rusty," she whispered to the night sky. "You saved me. You saved so many, and we'll keep going, I promise." And as the stars twinkled above, a soft breeze stirred the grass, as though Rusty was still there, watching over them all. Winter slowly gave way to spring once again, and though Rusty was gone, his spirit seemed to live on in every corner of the Haven. New dogs arrived almost daily, each with a heartbreaking story, and Emily and Sarah, along with their ever-growing team, worked hard to heal them. One of the new arrivals was a small, trembling beagle named Max, found abandoned on the side of the highway. His eyes were filled with fear, and he flinched at every sound. Shadow, now the wise elder among the dogs, took it upon himself to stay close to Max, lying beside him at night, nudging him gently when he wouldn't eat. Slowly, Max began to trust, following Shadow around and eventually wagging his tail. Meanwhile, Emily had started visiting schools to speak to children about kindness and animal care. With Daisy often by her side, she would share stories of Rusty and the countless other dogs who found hope at Rusty's Haven. The children, inspired, began organizing donation drives, bringing food, toys, and blankets to the shelter. One bright morning, as Emily stood before a group of children in a school auditorium, a little boy named Ethan raised his hand. "Miss Emily," he asked, "do you think dogs can understand when we love them?" Emily smiled, tears prickling her eyes. "Yes, Ethan. They may not speak like us, but they feel love very deeply, sometimes even more than people do." Back at the sanctuary, a new project had taken shape, an outdoor memorial garden called Rusty's Garden of Hope, where visitors could sit, remember their lost pets, and share stories. The garden had a beautiful pond, flowers, and a bench where Rusty's stone lay, always surrounded by fresh flowers brought by those whose lives he had touched. One day, as Emily watered the flowers, a young woman approached her. "Are you Emily?" she asked softly. Emily nodded. The woman, holding a worn photograph of a golden retriever, said, "This is Buddy. He passed last month. He was my best friend. I wanted to visit because Rusty's story gave me hope during his final days. Thank you." Emily hugged her tightly, tears in both their eyes. "You're always welcome here. Rusty's Haven is for everyone who loved and was loved by a dog." Meanwhile, Sarah had been working on expanding their foster program, partnering with families who could temporarily care for dogs until they were adopted. This allowed them to rescue even more dogs than before. Soon, dogs who had once been too scared to leave their kennels were now living in homes, learning to trust humans again. One special foster case was Bella, a Great Dane with deep scars on her back, likely from abuse. She was terrified of men and loud voices. Sarah spent weeks working with Bella, sitting quietly near her, reading books out loud, letting her get used to a human presence without any pressure. Slowly, Bella began to relax. Her first wag of the tail brought tears to everyone's eyes. Summer arrived, and so did a celebration, Rusty's Day, an annual event to honor Rusty's memory and celebrate the lives saved in his name. The sanctuary was filled with families who had adopted dogs from Rusty's Haven. There were games, food stalls, and a stage where Emily and Sarah shared updates about their mission. Shadow and Daisy, now local celebrities, walked among the guests, receiving pets and cuddles. Max, the beagle, even joined in, chasing a ball, a sight Emily never thought she'd see when he first arrived. During her speech, Emily said, "Every dog you see here was once broken, scared, and hopeless. But look at them now, happy, loved, and home. This is Rusty's legacy. Every time we open our hearts to a dog in need, we keep his spirit alive." As the sun set, lanterns were released into the sky, each carrying a wish or a message for a beloved pet. Emily and Sarah stood together, watching the lights float upwards. Emily whispered, Rusty, wherever you are, I hope you see this. You gave us a mission, and we'll never stop. As weeks turned into months, Rusty's haven continued to grow. Emily and Sarah were approached by other animal rescue organizations to collaborate, and soon they were hosting joint rescues, transporting dogs from overcrowded shelters to places where they had a chance for adoption. One chilly autumn day, a surprise visitor arrived, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson carrying a tiny, shivering puppy. "I found her in a ditch," he said, voice shaking. "I don't know how to care for her." Emily took the puppy into her arms, feeling how fragile she was. "You've done the most important thing by bringing her here. She's safe now." Mr. Thompson visited the sanctuary every day after that, forming a bond with the little puppy, who was named Hope. Eventually, Emily suggested he adopt her. With tears in his eyes, he agreed. For Mr. Thompson, Hope became more than a dog. She was his companion, bringing light back into his life. As winter approached again, the haven prepared for another year of challenges and love. Emily often sat by Rusty's stone in the garden, thinking about how much had changed since that day she first found him abandoned and afraid. "You were my beginning, Rusty," she whispered one evening, watching the stars. "And because of you, we've saved hundreds. I wish you could see them all." Just then, Shadow and Daisy ran up beside her, resting their heads in her lap. Emily smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Rusty's haven was no longer just a place. It was a movement, a family, a promise that no dog would be forgotten and no heart would be left unloved. Months had passed since Rusty's farewell, but his spirit still lingered in every corner of the haven. Shadow and Daisy, now the guiding souls of Rusty's haven, carried on his mission with unwavering dedication. Yet, the world outside the sanctuary was changing fast, and Emily and Sarah knew they needed to evolve to keep up with growing challenges. One sunny morning, a new arrival brought both heartbreak and hope. A small, frail puppy named Max was found, tied to a tree on the outskirts of town. His body weak from neglect, but his eyes still shining with a spark of life. When Emily gently picked him up, Shadow was by her side, watching closely. It was as if Shadow instinctively knew how to comfort the little one, nuzzling Max softly as they reached the haven. Over the next few weeks, Max slowly gained strength. Shadow took him under his wing, and Daisy, ever watchful, guided him when he felt unsure. Max's presence breathed new energy into the haven, and visitors couldn't help but be drawn to his resilience. Meanwhile, Emily and Sarah were invited to speak at an international animal welfare conference. They hesitated at first. Leaving the haven was never easy, but the opportunity to share Rusty's story on a global platform was too important to pass up. At the conference, Emily took the stage, photos of Rusty, Shadow, Daisy, and Max playing on a screen behind her. Rusty taught us that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds. Every dog we rescue carries a piece of his spirit. Our goal now is to build a world where no animal feels abandoned. The speech received a standing ovation, and offers of support and partnership poured in. Charities, government officials, and animal lovers wanted to help expand Rusty's haven into other countries. Emily and Sarah realized that Rusty's legacy could become a global movement. Back home, life was bustling. A new therapy program was launched, where children with anxiety and trauma visited the haven to bond with the dogs. Max became an unexpected star. His playful antics and gentle nature won over even the shyest children. Emily often watched from the porch as Max led a group of kids through the fields, Shadow and Daisy keeping a protective eye on them. One afternoon, as Emily sat under the old oak tree, their special thinking spot, Sarah joined her, holding a folder filled with letters. "These are from families who adopted from us. Look at this one." She handed Emily a letter that read, "Because of Rusty's haven, we found Bella. She saved our son from the darkness of depression. Thank you for giving us a reason to smile again." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she read, "Rusty's still changing lives, even now. As winter neared again, a surprise visit warmed everyone's hearts. Officer Daniels, the man who had helped save Rusty all those years ago, walked through the gates, a gentle smile on his face. Behind him, a small shivering dog peeked out, a scrappy terrier with scared eyes. "Found him wandering near the highway," Daniels said. "Thought if anyone could help, it would be you." Emily knelt down, her hand extended gently. "Hey there, little one. You're safe now." The terrier, whom they named Lucky, soon joined the Haven family. Max became his closest friend, and together, they symbolized a new chapter, a reminder that while Rusty was gone, his work continued. As snowflakes began to fall, Emily stood at Rusty's memorial stone, Shadow and Daisy beside her, Max and Lucky playing nearby. "You gave me a purpose, Rusty," she whispered, "and I promise, as long as I'm breathing, we'll keep saving them, just like you saved me." Looking up at the sky, she smiled, feeling a soft breeze, just like the day she first met Rusty, swirling around her. It was as if Rusty was reminding her that love never truly leaves. It lives on in every life it touches. The seasons turned once again, and as the first spring blooms emerged, Rusty's Haven stood tall, a testament to love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Emily stood by the garden where Rusty's memorial stone lay, watching as new dogs played freely, tails wagging and eyes shining, each carrying a piece of Rusty's legacy. Shadow, now fully grown and wise, watched over the new rescues with quiet dignity. Daisy, always calm and intuitive, continued to help guide dogs who arrived too scared to trust. Together, they had stepped into the roles Rusty once held, the torch passed on lovingly. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the gentle breeze on her face, and turned as Sarah approached with a clipboard. "We have more applications today," Sarah said with a soft smile. "Adoptions, new rescues, volunteers wanting to help. It just doesn't stop." "And it shouldn't," Emily replied, her eyes filled with determination. "That's what Rusty would want, for us to keep going, to keep saving them." But as much as the Haven had grown, Emily knew there was still one thing left to do: ensure that Rusty's mission would never die, even when she and Sarah were gone. The time had come to formalize Rusty's Haven into a foundation, with funding and leadership that would carry the work forward for generations. Meetings were set with lawyers, donors, and community leaders. Emily and Sarah worked day and night, crafting the Rusty's Haven Foundation, an organization that would provide rescue, rehabilitation, and education, but also lobby for animal rights, better laws, and public awareness. As the paperwork finalized, Emily looked around at the bustling sanctuary. Volunteers bathed dogs, children read books to shy puppies, and adoptive families met their future companions. Her heart swelled with pride and hope. Meanwhile, Shadow and Daisy found new allies in the Haven: a small, energetic terrier named Max, who had been rescued from an abusive home, and Bella, a motherly golden retriever who had been abandoned during her pregnancy. Both dogs quickly rose as helpers, following in Rusty's footsteps. One bright morning, as Emily prepared to meet with city officials, she noticed a small boy standing nervously at the gate. He looked around 8 years old, clutching a tattered, stuffed animal. Emily walked over gently. "Hi there, sweetie. Can I help you?" she asked softly. The boy, whose name was Alex, hesitated before saying, "My mom said we can't keep my dog anymore. He's really sick. She told me to bring him here because you help dogs." Emily's heart broke as Alex opened a battered crate, revealing a trembling, emaciated Labrador, his eyes dull but filled with a flicker of hope. "Oh, sweetheart, you did the right thing bringing him here," Emily whispered, tears threatening her eyes. "We'll help him, I promise." She called for Shadow, who came over slowly, sensing the dog's fear. Gently, Shadow nudged the sick dog, offering silent reassurance. Daisy followed, placing herself calmly nearby. The Labrador relaxed slightly, leaning into Shadow's side. Emily looked down at Alex. "You can visit him anytime. He's safe now." A tear slid down Alex's cheek, but he smiled for the first time, seeing how the other dogs welcomed his friend. As days passed, the Labrador, whom Alex named Lucky, began to heal. Under Shadow and Daisy's watchful eyes, Lucky grew stronger, his fur regaining its sheen, his eyes sparkling with life. His bond with Alex only deepened, and within a few months Alex's mother returned, this time to adopt Lucky back, realizing the importance of that friendship. Stories like Lucky's multiplied. Each day, more dogs arrived, more lives were changed. Proof that Rusty's Haven was becoming more than a shelter, it was a place of miracles. By the time the Rusty's Haven Foundation was publicly launched, hundreds of people gathered for the ceremony. Emily stood at the podium, Shadow and Daisy by her side, looking out over the sea of faces. Families, adopters, volunteers, government officials, and even children who had grown up visiting the sanctuary. Today, Emily began, her voice steady, though her heart was full. We celebrate a dream that started with one broken dog. Rusty showed me that no matter how lost or hurt you feel, love can heal you. And love can save countless others. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Rusty is gone, but his legacy lives in every wagging tail here today. And with this foundation, we promise that no dog will ever be left behind, that every dog who finds their way to us will know love, safety, and home. Thunderous applause echoed, and tears were not uncommon in that crowd. Tears of hope, of gratitude, of shared commitment to a kinder world. Months later, as winter's chill set in again, Emily sat in her small office overlooking the sanctuary. Snowflakes drifted gently, covering the fields in soft white. Shadow lay beside her desk, Daisy curled at his feet. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow. Emily looked at the picture of Rusty on her desk, a photo taken on the day he arrived, scared, wounded, yet unknowingly about to change the world. "We did it, Rusty," she whispered. "Your dream lives on." Outside, the sound of children laughing, dogs barking joyfully, and volunteers chatting filled the air, a symphony of life, love, and hope. And as Emily watched the falling snow, she could almost feel Rusty's presence beside her, as if he were still watching over them, guiding every step of the way. The camera of life zoomed out, over Rusty's Haven, the fields, the town, and the people whose lives had been forever changed by one abandoned dog who refused to give up. And as stars appeared in the night sky, one seemed to twinkle just a bit, brighter, as though Rusty himself was looking down, proud of what had become of the love he started.